This show is sponsored by Sevi, answering all your commercial real estate needs. Sevi is the first commercial real estate company committed to the 4 C's: commercial real estate, community, content, and culture. Go visit Sevi at Sevi, SEVI, properties.com. Again, SeviProperties.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today I have a very special guest for you. We have Robert Dowling. Robert is the president and CEO of West Fourth Strategy. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thanks so much for having me on, and looking forward to talking to you today.
Of course. Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. So before we get into your personal and business journey, I'd like the audience to get to know the business a little better, just in case they haven't heard and they're like, what is West Fourth Strategy? If you can give us just a brief general overview as far as what you folks do, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten told that the name of the company, it sounds like, a New York City like consulting firm or something along those lines. But we are a federal IT services contractor. So we provide professional and IT service support to federal agencies. Today, we support roughly 20 independent agencies and departments within the federal government. So as opposed to maybe state and local services that other people provide, everything that we do is on the federal government support side. We are about 120 employees as of today across the United States, and have been around since founded in 2011, but really focused on the services that we do today since 2016.
Great. So government contractor.
Yep, that's the name of the game in this area. But yeah, we are one of many, but I like to think that we're unique in our own ways. So
Sure, definitely. Are you, by the way, originally from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area?
I grew up, most of my life is from here. So I was born in Boston, and my father was in the restaurant business. So we jumped around a little bit when I was younger, but settled into in Loudoun County, right here in the Northern Virginia area, when I was in about third grade. So I've been here for quite a long time. I spent a little bit of time away, obviously at school, but then ended up coming back to the Northern Virginia area. So as I've been coined a local, if you could, or some one of the rare people that have grown up here versus a transplant, but it's become home over the time, and I love it here.
Yeah, and especially if you came here, you said in third grade. So yeah, you're definitely a local.
Okay, you can put me in that bucket.
Yeah, and the Loudoun County area, I mean, they've experienced tremendous growth the past 10, 20, 30 years compared to how it was before.
It's wild. So I originally grew up in Ashburn, and I remember vividly, there was now that area has become I can't even recognize it or get it around there anymore. But when I came there, my elementary school was about 200 students, right? And it was what became coined Old Ashburn. And then eventually we got bused over to Seneca Ridge Middle School, which was over in kind of towards the Sterling area, Cascades. And then that was before they built what was Farmwell Middle School, the first middle school that they had, and Ashburn Elementary, the first kind of big elementary school. And now I went to Broad Run, and then Broad Run became Broad Run and split into Potomac Falls, and then Stonebridge came from there. And now there's, I think, like 14 high schools, which used to make up the territory, and there was just one high school. So, and my
That's
old
crazy.
elementary high school became the annex for the high school, where they would have like classes over there as overflow for the high school. But once AOL came in, everything changed really overnight in comparison to what it was previously, and now it is it's just incredible what's happened there.
Yeah. I'm sure, Robert, growing up in Loudoun County, you were, back then as a child thinking about, hey, let me go into maybe this GovCon sector. So if I could just briefly take you back to your childhood, what were you into? What would you like? Any activities or sports?
Yeah. So I am I grew up playing baseball and then golf. Those were my sports. Like any kid, played a little bit of soccer, played roller hockey growing up, kind of, but really honed in on baseball. And my dad was a very, very passionate golfer. We watched a lot of golf events. We used to go to the President's Cup, which is held right here in Gaithersburg. Oftentimes, it was every 4 years. They would have it at Robert Trent Jones Golf Club, which is right over in Gaithersburg. And I had to choose between baseball and golf eventually, and stuck with golf. So that has been a passion of mine since really I was about six years old, and what I was really into. But more on the professional side of things, my dad grew up and I grew up around my dad being in the restaurant business, which I try and be gentle with this, but it is a extremely difficult industry to be in. So he was not really around, during the evenings, and it was kind of raised by my mother, and my dad was always over at the restaurant. He was with originally Bennigan's, which came out of kind of the New England area, and then moved over to Outback Steakhouse, and was with them once that company had gone public, and was a proprietor of the Outback Steakhouse that's actually in Cascades. It's still there today. And eventually he moved over to California Pizza Kitchen. So I was around just kind of a home environment that was very kind of blue collar work ethic. So it was not a blue collar job, but it was kind of a grow and grind and work and good things will happen atmosphere. And it instilled a lot of passion in me. That said, I really gravitated towards, even at kind of a younger age, the operations side of what he was doing on a day-to-day basis. So my mom used to support the businesses that he would run, doing payroll and those sorts of things for the company. And that's how I kind of started getting introduced more from the operating side of how those businesses worked. And it kind of carried through, my interests moving forward from there.
That's interesting. So your first job wasn't a server; it was more just on the operation side.
No, my first real job. So I worked at a golf club, a club called River Creek, over near Leesburg, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a cart boy there for a while. But my first real job, I was in high school, and I was a teller, a bank teller, at what was First Virginia Bank, FVB back in the day, which now the banks have gotten rolled up so many times. I think it's a part of Wells Fargo. Ultimately, I think it got bought by BB&T, and BB&T got bought by Wells Fargo. But I had to go through all of the training and everything. I remember vividly being a high schooler, my senior year, going through training to become a bank teller. So, and I was a senior year of high school. That's what I did. And it paid a lot better than all the other jobs everybody else had, obviously. So that was my first introduction to what ultimately became my passion, which was finance, and that industry. That was for the early days of it, as in high school.
So was it during high school, Robert, that you thought about, hey, maybe let me go into, when I go into college, maybe major in finance or just something with business?
Yeah, I remember once the allure of becoming, and maybe I guess the best way to put it is my dreams of becoming a baseball player and then a golfer. Once those had kind of gotten through the system relatively quickly, I remember very early on telling my mom, even before what I knew what it was, I wanted to be a CFO. Like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a part of a executive team, but have a finance and accounting orientation to it. So I went to undergrad. I actually spent about a year at James Madison, and then I transferred to Virginia Tech. So ultimately, and at Virginia Tech, I double majored in finance and management. So kind of that blend that I had in my mind of what I thought it would take. Little did I know that obviously being a CFO introduces a lot more accounting, not necessarily as much finance. But I liked the accounting side of it, but I liked it as kind of a necessary evil to understand the operations of a business and how they orient and are run to make managerial decisions and finance decisions. And quite frankly, little did I didn't know this at the time, but many of larger companies CFOs are less accountants at that stage of development. They actually, my idea that I had naively back then was actually the right idea for a CFO. It just so happens that a lot of the CFOs come up through more of an accounting track. But really what they're doing more on a day-to-day basis is not that. So that was actually, the first kind of position that I thought I told my mom that I thought I wanted to do was be a CFO. And I tracked relatively close to it over all these years. So,
that's so true. What I've seen on the executive level, a lot of, like you said, the CFOs sort of come through whether CPA route and the Big Four, and then from there, go from public to private, and then
yep,
just controller, move up the ranks until they get the CFO position, right?
that's right. That's right. Yes, and now we get into like personal opinion, and quite frankly, that's for larger companies, and maybe we'll get a little bit more into my background and why I feel like I'm allowed to kind of have an opinion on some of this stuff. Is if your controller is good, then if a CFO is too heavy on the accounting side, that is not a good fit for your company. They are swooping into the things that a good controller should be doing for the business, not the things that a CFO should be doing for your operations. That should be more on the strategy side of things. And I think those are some of the best, kind of CFOs that I've seen and worked with in the past. So I digress a little bit on personal opinion there, but I took it really from undergrad. I actually went immediately into grad school and got my master's in finance at Boston College. So I kind of wanted always to go back up to Boston and experience a little bit of that city where most of my family was all from, and still a lot of them still lived. And got to do that right from undergrad into grad school, and finished up my master's in finance, and then started looking for positions and ended up getting pulled back down to the Northern Virginia area.
Oh, that's great. Came back home.
Yes, exactly. So it always ends up coming full circle. This area is a bit of it's not in a negative way, but it is a black hole in terms of kind of sucking people in, and then they tend to stay. So it ended up pulling me back in as well.
That's great. So did you go into, I guess, a government contractor, or what happened right after grad school?
No, yeah, my path is about as strange as you're gonna, find for the position that I ended up in. So right out of undergrad, I ended up working for KPMG. So I was working in their structured finance group right here in Tysons, coming out of, for me, grad school. And they recruited a lot of UVA and William and Mary folks as well. So I came in with a group of kind of 15 undergraduates. I was the only person that had a graduate degree, and working in structured finance, which at the time, for those not familiar with it, was working around mortgage-backed securities. So this was in the 2000 and really kind of 7 timeframe, and when things really started to get hairy in the 2008, obviously eventuality that we saw there. So what we were really doing was doing a lot of the modeling of what the investment bankers were doing in terms of mortgage-backed security structures out of New York. So the investment bankers would be up all hours of the night packaging mortgage-backed securities, and they needed somebody to double check and kind of audit and mirror the work that they were doing, not necessarily evaluate the structures that they were building, but just make sure that the math was all tying out. So that's what I was doing with KPMG, and I'll never forget it. We had a group of about 150 people in structured finance in this office, not too far from where I'm sitting today. And the partners all pulled us together. This would have been kind of like late 2007, early 2008. By now, everybody I'm sure has seen kind of, The Big Short and a lot of read about it. And now there's Harvard case law on the stuff that I was experiencing firsthand. But the partners pulled everybody in. They said, I know there's been rumblings countrywide at the time was one of our biggest clients. And they started to suck wind a little bit. There was kind of a little bit of chatter about Lehman Brothers, and it hadn't really fully hit the fan yet. And the partners just pulled us in and said, everybody's fine. Everybody's job is safe. Don't worry about it. Everything's good. And as a team that had all come in, the 15 of us used to go grab lunch every day and, go at various places around Tysons. I remember sitting down at lunch. And I was a little bit older. I had been through grad school, and I had known a little bit more. And everybody was like, "Oh, well, that was a good meeting." Partner said we're all good, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to look for a job tomorrow." And I was like, my intuition at the time, nobody had ever told me this, was if anybody tells you that your job is safe, start looking for a job. And that was just my gut instinct at the time. So I put my resume out there with a headhunter and just started looking around. And I got a call from the headhunter, and they said, "Listen, you've never really thought about investment banking. You probably, that wasn't Virginia Tech was not heavy, and Boston College is, but I was in grad school at the time, is not kind of a feeder program for investment banking, unlike a UVA as a school is." And they said, "But there's a startup investment bank." It was 4 people that broke off from Houlihan Lokey, which is a massive investment bank, just below the bulge brackets, kind of a mid-tier. And they broke off and they started their own investment bank called Kips DeSanto. And, they're looking for a young, hungry analyst that can work long hours and is wanting to learn the industry. And that investment bank was all focused on aerospace and defense and government contracting. So I started with them back in 2008 and worked on sell-side investment banking and advisory for government contractors for about 11 years. So I did a bunch of years as an analyst, as an associate, as a vice president. And, I worked away most of my 20s and my early 30s, pulling kind of 120-hour weeks, just week in, week out, and learned a lot about the industry, a lot about finance, a lot about accounting, a lot about executive management teams, and how to kind of grow a business, and the rest was kind of history from there. That's what set me on the government contracting path.
Sure. Yeah, that was huge there. I'm sure that was a big exposure for you as far as learning the ins and outs of, mergers and acquisitions, and then dealing with clients and buying and the acquisition part of it.
Yeah, it certainly was. A lot of it early on was very tactical. How do you kind of understand the finances of a business? How do you position a business to take it out to market, to contact sellers or to contact buyers that would be interested in the company that you were working on? But quickly, after I made it to the associate level and eventually to the vice president level, it became a lot more advisory support. So meeting a company, hopefully a year, 2 years, sometimes 5 years in advance of when they were going to go to market and eventually try and sell their company, and help the CEO and the CFO and the executive leadership team think through tweaks and changes that they could make to help increase the enterprise value of their businesses, that they would ultimately get into market. So the sell side one is a tremendous industry to have worked in, because for a couple of reasons. One, you have to become a jack of all trades, because on any given day, you're either on the phone with accountants, lawyers, financing partners, actual government contracting personnel, buyers, sellers, kind of large and small. So you really have to be able to kind of be a chameleon and understand a lot of different industries. You don't have to be as knowledgeable as the lawyers, but you can't be on a call and not understand the legal intricacies of what they're talking about. And similar in the accounting field or on HR matters or all sorts of those things as you're going through, whether it be diligence or just understanding a business in general. Not to mention having to know government contracting very well, knowing all the contract vehicles, knowing all the agencies, knowing where the budgets sit, knowing where people sit in the ecosystem on the IT side or on the aerospace defense, whether it's in the supply chain or otherwise, to know what tier that those providers are in the ecosystem. So it forces you to get very smart in a lot of different areas and be able to become very versatile in applying knowledge and having dialogue with a lot of different people in different ways. So I absolutely loved it. And not to mention, day to day, you're interacting with CEOs, presidents, division leads, and typically the CFO. And if they have a chief growth officer, that's who you're interacting with. So I remember vividly my first meeting. I was a year into investment banking, and I was sitting there with the CEO and the CFO trying to have an intelligent conversation about their business and how we were going to position them for sale, and just being like, yeah, I probably should not be in this room, but it was a ton of fun, and I learned an immense amount during the 11 years I was there.
Through that experience, Robert, I understand your role primarily was on the advisory sales side, but being exposed to this, did it make you think, hey, one day I would like to maybe be on the principal buy side of this? And then, aha.
Yeah, it did. And so I got to my third year, I think it was my third year of investment banking, and I was up for kind of promotion to director. And I feel, not everybody has to subscribe to this, but I feel like at that point, for Bob Kipps, Kevin DeSanto, and Mark Marlin, who were the original real founders of the organization, I felt like taking that director promotion would have been a commitment to them that, like, this is my career. I'm going to be a career person with this. That is kind of the loyal nature of just the way I am, the way I've operated over my time, and how I managed. Everybody's like, how did you do 11 years in investment banking? That's like 44 years in other industries, And I was like, I was always just focused on helping them build Kipps, which eventually that company ended up selling to Capital One about a year after I left. But I was like, listen, I don't want to be a career investment banker. I have other aspirations. And having been around a lot of those CEOs and those executive leadership teams, it started to build an entrepreneurial bug in me very early on that I didn't know existed, really. And those those seeds had started to kind of blossom a little bit. So I left there, and I had I've done this twice in my career, and I don't advise it to anybody, but I left with no other job. I said, Bob, I went in, I gave him my resignation, and I said, listen, I've appreciated it. It was actually like an emotional moment for me, like everything that you guys have been done, and the gamble you took on me, and hopefully you guys feel like it paid off in that time frame. But like I've got to go see what else is in this industry. And so I left, had no job, and just started going back to the network of people that I had met, and ultimately went to General Dynamics IT. They had bought a company called CSRA. So GDIT at the time was about $5 billion. They had just bought CSRA, which is about a $5 billion company in of itself, and those were getting merged together. And Allison Harbrick, their CFO, needed somebody to do their indirect rates and then do the financial integration of those two businesses. And I sat down with her over lunch, and I'll never forget, we were at Matchbox in Mosaic, and we were having lunch, and she said, Robert, your resume has nothing on it that makes you inherently equipped to do what I'm about to ask you to do for us. She said, but I trust you and I know you'll figure it out. It was her exact line. So I was over at GDIT helping them do the financial integration, helping them consolidate their rate structure for the combined business, which was obviously going to be very different as they integrated those two entities together. And I was honestly, I loved it. And there's different personalities in terms of being with the big companies and the small companies that you may hear, especially in this market in the DMV area. And I loved it. I loved even just the complex problems that we were figuring out on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, I probably would have stayed there for a long time. I was working directly with Amy Gilliand, who's obviously the president of that division, and Alison Harbrecht, the CFO, and a lot of their executive leadership team on the strategy for bringing those together. And out of the blue, I got a call from Enlightenment Capital, and it was a guy that worked there. He was going back into the government to go work for an agency of the government. And he said, listen, I'm leaving, but they just raised their third fund and they need somebody to help deploy that money and invest into GovCon businesses. And, at that point, I had thought I was too old to get into private equity. Normally you do like the investment banking thing and that equips you, and then you get hired into private equity. And then, that's how you get over to the buy side, which is like, everybody, that's the nirvana side, right? You're investing, you're using your fund, you're deploying, you're in charge, all the advisors work for you, that's the nirvana side of the industry. And I had thought that had passed me by, and it probably had, but they just it would just happen to be a solely focused government services focused and boutique private equity group that had raised a fund and had a gap and had an open position. I was about as in-depth knowledgeable on the GovCon industry and had a really strong finance background as you could kind of come across. So it checked both those boxes. So I went over there for about 4 years and help them deploy all of their Fund 3, which was about $250 million. And then they also deployed a lot of capital out of small business investment vehicle, an SBIC for them, which was about another $200 million. So that was about four years, and it was a blast. I learned an immense amount about investing, doing kind of roll-up strategies, investing in a platform acquisition, and then doing bolt-on acquisitions into it. We did a lot of credit deals over there, so investing debt on the books with a little bit of equity as well. So different kind of unique structures and investing in GovCon businesses and helping them ultimately grow and meet whatever objectives they had, whether it's just to achieve scale or build out their management teams or eventually build themselves and exit to a larger company in the industry.
How long were you with that private equity group for?
It was about 4 years.
Okay.
I was. So 4 years with them, and it was a great time. And then I did for the second time, I had to do it twice. I left a job without another job in early 2022. I left, and at the time I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was kind of thinking about it, and I had, by this point, and I think even going back to the kind of Kips DeSanto days, you could talk to some of my colleagues in the industry. I had brought up this idea of owning and operating, not just owning a government contractor. Even when I was at Kips DeSanto, whenever there was a project that came up that required a lot of like in-depth knowledge, like of the operations of the business, not just like a high level cursory knowledge of what the business does and things like that, but you had to do real analysis and keep up with the CFO or the division leads on like helping them do something technical. I loved getting into the weeds there. And that was like the early stages of me being like, okay, I could really get involved in the operations side of government contracting. So when I left, this would have been February 2022, I just started talking to a bunch of my mentors in the industry, and they all of them said like, you always said you wanted to do owning and operating, and a lot of them had owned businesses themselves or currently did, and they said the only thing that I can tell you is like there's never a good time. There's never a time that you're like, okay, I'm gonna buy a government contractor business and like, start to run it, or I'm gonna hang my own shingle and, now is the time. Everything is settled and everything's perfect. And I remember sitting down with my wife and just being like, here's kind of what people that are a lot smarter, that have been in the industry a lot longer than I have, are telling me. And she's like, why don't you do it? So I started meeting with a lot of the smaller banks in the area just to see if they would back me for financing and trying to go buy a government contractor. I had a lot of early success just, hearing good things from them in terms of what capital I would have to put in versus what I could finance through senior debt. And that was the easy part, actually, for me, because I had done a lot of interactions and a lot of credit deals when I was at Enlightenment. The harder part in this industry is finding a company that wants to sell at what you would consider the right kind of price in this industry that, doesn't have is selling for the right reason, I guess is the right, there's probably a lot of businesses that sell and, the reasons for them wanting to get out are, fine and well and good, but they don't set up for long-term success. So I was really looking for a business that was well positioned, that was going to be able to scale, that had a good culture already. I didn't need to go in and try and resuscitate the culture of the business to be what it once was or anything along those lines. Was already on good footing. Finding those, and I think if you talk to people in the market, finding good acquisition targets that really are a good fit is probably the most difficult part. So that took me about 5 or 6 months. A lot of kind of false positives on seeing targets out there that would be good, but ultimately met with Michael Sohal, the founder of Westforth, and we closed the transaction on November 15th of 2022.
Robert, that's pretty good. Just searching for a couple of months. I mean, sometimes I hear people searching for years, finding for that right first acquisition target.
Yeah, I am my to-do list usually doesn't make it more than about 5 hours. That's like the length. I could pull up my email inbox here. I wouldn't be disclosing anything because it's empty. Like the way I operate my life is kind of like checking things off and getting it done and not having to-dos outstanding. So I've seen acquisition searches taking a long time. For me, that 7 months felt like 70 years. So I hear you. But listen, once me and Michael kind of sat down, we got coffee together. We had the deal structured in about 20 minutes, and we got the deal done from there in about 2.5 months, which my career, kind of beginning of my career for 11 years was in mergers and acquisitions. That's about as fast as you're going to get a deal done, and still go through the appropriate levels of diligence to understand that there's no issues and things like that. So it went very, very quickly. But it's always uncertain, when I was playing a lot of golf during that time frame. It's like there's only so many meetings I could have. So my handicap definitely came down on the golf course, but ultimately it ended up being the perfect fit for me, and me and Michael to this day are very, very close. We text almost every other day, and we meet monthly for coffee. So for him, he feels like he couldn't have found a better person to kind of come in and marry the type of culture he was building into what it had needed to be, and to fill it out with the right management team for the future.
Yeah. So did you source this deal yourself, or were you putting during this period of several months, putting fillers out there with different investment bankers? This is my criteria. This is what I'm looking for, and so on.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a loaded question. So at first I was trying to source it on my own.
Okay.
And I know all the investment banks in the area. I have kind of close relationships. I guess, I thought that knowing all the investment banks would have led me to sourcing something myself.
Sure. You used to do that yourself,
I
right?
know, but I forgot about a little intricacy that doesn't isn't readily apparent in the industry is the small business, right? The $5 million revenue or $10 million revenue business, which is not of interest to the investment banks because it's not economical to sell that company at that stage, given what their fee needs to be, right?
Mhm.
The fee would be too expensive for that to be an economical deal to do in market, right?
Mhm.
So the $5-10 million business is not of interest to them to sell. However, that is their pipeline for the next 5 years, right? Those small companies that are not ready now are the pipeline for there. So if I'm coming in and picking off a bunch of those types of companies, I'm really eating into the pipeline of the investment banks. So that was a small nuance that I hadn't really pieced together. And that's not to say that people were like not showing me deals. It's just their focus is not on that is
Sure.
showing those size deals to people like me, an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, a kind of a self-sponsor, if you will, that's trying to acquire a business. So I ended up looping up with a company called Genesis, who is really kind of a broker in the space that really reaches out and tries to find people that are interested in selling their companies. And they ended up knowing Michael and knowing that business, and Westforth as it is today, and connected us together. And then, he and I, quickly just kind of got together and hit it off in a great conversation. And I quickly kind of prove to him a level of trustworthiness, which is ultimately what you need to get a transaction done. Early on, I remember Kevin DeSanto, one of the first things he taught me in mergers and acquisitions was deals get done when both parties are equally as unhappy about the deal, right? Once you find the balance, like it is very rare that you get through a merger and acquisition transaction and like everybody's like, this is the greatest thing, everybody's happy, all that kind of stuff. What
Mhm.
is actually the case of what's happening there is everybody's kind of equally like, okay, this is good. Because if not, then one party is going to feel like they won out. Either one party's feeling like, oh, we got this business for really cheap, or the other party is feeling like, man, I can't believe the buyer is like paying this for our company. What's actually happening is it's an equilibrium between like, okay, like we're not totally jazzed, like we had to give up some stuff to get this deal done, and the other party's feeling the exact same way. And when that equilibrium happens, that's when transactions get done, is how I always, to this day, think about it. And that's why the relationship between the buyer and the seller is so critical, right? I mean, there is every transaction I have ever been a part of, there have been there's always at least one time where you're like, this deal is dead, right? Like there is no chance that this deal is going to get completed. Like it happens on every single transaction. There's like one thing, like one point, everybody's like, this thing is dead. Ultimately, everybody, clear heads prevail and clear minds prevail, and you end up getting the deal done. But there's so much like kind of intricacy that happens in an M&A transaction that it needs to fall back on something. And in that particular instance, it fell back on me and Michael having a really close relationship. And when he had a problem, he called me up. And when I had a problem, I called him up directly. And we worked through it, and whether it was economical or a deal issue or a legal issue that we found during diligence. And, we got it done.
That's great. You know, sometimes you hear that you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince or Princess Charming, right? What was it about West Fork strategy that you liked?
Um, so Michael and I are a lot alike. In one, I don't know if we're necessarily workaholics, but we both we have an inability to turn it off, right? It's just always on our mind and always going, and trying to think about ways that we can improve or do things differently, would be kind of number one. And number two was, Michael, when he started West Fourth and he first pivoted it over to go refocus, the business focused on commercial for a period of about 5 years. And in 2016, he pivoted back to government, which was where he had started his career and built up his career in the industry. And he said something to me early on. He said, you know, I told people that I wanted to build a business that did all prime work right off the start. And he said that I got told I was just crazy. He was like, you got to follow, like I got told I got to follow the same script everybody else does. You do subcontract work for a period of time, and then you build up some good relationships and some past performance. And then, you know, you get a chance to submit your first prime contract, and then you become like a prime contractor. And then over time, you pivot from subcontracts from other vendors in the space to prime contracts. And he was like, no, I'm not doing it that way. I'm just going to bid prime work. And everybody told him he was crazy. And quite frankly, he was just like, yeah, well, I'm going to do it this way. And then he did. And that's how he went about it. And the way he did was he found agencies that were not like the big coveted agencies, like a DHS, right? Or an HHS, or, you know, the Intel agencies. He found kind of agencies that were a little bit off the beaten path, like a government publishing office or a federal housing or a PBGC, like and he bid for prime work there. So he found a different angle and a different approach to get into the industry. And for me, and the way that I like to approach things is, you know, you tell me I can't do something, and then you've lit the fuse, right? Like that is, and it's like, yeah, I couldn't go from one industry, can't go from a, you know, accounting firm into investment banking, can't go from investment banking to a large prime, can't go from a large prime into private equity. And you certainly can't go from private equity without having, you know, a family. You know, I don't come from means by any stretch. And I was not sitting on a ton of, you know, excess capital. You certainly can't go buy a government contractor. So like, I don't know what's in my nature, but if you say that I can't do something, then it's really going to drive me to go try and, like, you know, prove people wrong. And he was the exact same way. So that mentality I knew was ingrained in the culture of West Fork. And I think if you start from there, because what's going to end up happening is if you're trying to do what people say you can't do, you're automatically working on hard problems. Like you're automatically working on things that are a little bit more difficult. And fundamentally, I think that people enjoy their jobs when they're working on things that challenge them. I think that a lot of dissatisfaction with people's jobs often happens from being pigeonholed into positions and not being asked to take on more. So West Forth, I think, at its like most simplest or most simple form, is a culture based on a belief in the capability of people. The belief that somebody that doesn't really have the qualifications can do investment banking, and somebody that doesn't really have, like, you know, the bread and butter resume can go into private equity, and, you know, a belief that people are actually exceptionally more capable than maybe they even believe in themselves, but certainly more than what other people believe that they're capable of. And that ultimately is really what we're all about. And that's what, you know, Michael believed in and I believed in. So like, I knew I was looking for, you know, the bones of the house to be good in like the acquisition target, because I knew I was going to do additional acquisitions and that we could mold what West Forth would become through both organic growth and where we chose to bid work, but also through inorganic growth. So ultimately, I knew if the bones of the house were built on a thesis of we're going to challenge status quo, and we're going to go about that in a way that is our way of doing it. And if other people don't like it, that's okay. They don't have to, but this is the way that we're going to do it. If I knew that was intact, then I knew that we could kind of build on the house from there.
That's great. Robert, it's been now later this year, 2 years, right, since
Yeah,
acquisition.
yeah.
You
Uh,
know, go ahead.
so it's been great. So when I acquired the company, we were 58 employees, and we're at 117 now. So the company has about doubled
Yeah.
since we took it over. We had some nice wins got into the Navy. We got into Health and Human Services and a few other agencies, which has been great. Spent a lot of that time really following a playbook that I worked with on back at Enlightenment Capital, working with a company called Artland, and a guy named Sonny Singh, who I'm very close with. And the thought process, he had bought a company that was about 25 million in revenue. And he spent the first year really building out the management team and getting the infrastructure shored up. And then partnered with us at Enlightenment Capital. And then we went out and found some nice acquisition targets, about 3 of them. And now that business is about 10 times the size of when that was. So I spent kind of a similar first year really building out the team. Michael was probably one of the smartest and hardest working people I've met in this industry. But what that resulted in is he took on a lot of workload for himself. And so when I came in, we spent the first year just building out a good management team. We hired 2 recruiters, a COO. We kind of partnered with a PEO to build out our HR side of things. We brought in an accounting firm called Fitzwater and Dean out of Warrington, who I'd worked with about 15 years earlier. And I liked the way that they did the finance and accounting apparatus for that company. So the first year was really just, we were bidding a lot, but heads down, getting the infrastructure in place, similar to what Aon, which was formerly Artland, we had done with that business when I was in Enlightenment. And I thought that was a good playbook. And then have the COO, Chris Embert, that works with me, is incredible. And he started to take over day-to-day operations so that I could pivot to using what was in my tool belt, which is on the M&A front. And knock on wood, we should be closing our first acquisition target here in about at the end of June. So we'll see, but things look good right now. And if it's not that one, it'll be a different one. But right now, it looks like we're sticking to script on what the game plan was.
That's great. So now onto that second phase of M&A part, right?
Yes, the M&A, and then the most difficult part, which is integration, right? And
Sure.
seamless integration. Acquisitions ultimately strike fear into employees. I mean, they just do. Everybody hears acquisition and you think redundancy and what's going to change and what's happening to my benefits. And I liked being the kind of small company we were. What's it gonna be like with this other entity? So getting in early and very early and helping employees understand that we don't have clause, that the government services industry is actually not based on cost reduction. It's based on revenue synergy. So there's a different thesis. We don't operate in the industries where it's like, hey, we're going to shut down this plant and then we're going to move that manufacturing into this plant. And guess what? That's how we make, an acquisition 1 + 1 = 2 or 3. That's not what happens in government services. In government services, it's all about retaining as many people as you possibly can. and generating revenue synergies between the two businesses. It really has very little to do with cost takeout whatsoever. In fact, sometimes you're injecting more capital into an acquisition process because you're trying to retain the professional talent that you have in there from a services standpoint. Yeah, the hopefully a close, and then I'll be focused almost every day for the first 3 to 6 months on just making sure that people are taken care of and we can integrate the businesses as seamlessly as you can with something along those lines.
Robert, just in less than 2 years since you've grown your team count. I mean, double. How have you done that?
Yeah, well, I guess we had an early success. So I had never submitted a government contract bid on my that's not where my expertise is. But I kind of I dove in. I just started reading RFPs just every single, sometimes 10, 15 a day, every single day once I bought West Fourth, even prior to that, quite frankly. And we found a good opportunity with the Navy. We bid it at the end of 2022. So about a month and a half in to taking over West Fourth, we submitted the first major bid and ended up winning the largest contract that West Fourth ever had, which was about 24 FTEs for the Navy here in Bethesda and in Portsmouth, Virginia. So local support to Navy Force Health Protection Command. And I just, every dollar that comes into the business, I redeploy into growth, quite frankly. I take a very modest salary, and everything, it just goes back into how we can get more support resources to drive growth. So we've been able to add Chris, our COO, 2 recruiters, a technical writer, a division lead for our 2 divisions. So 2 leads, 1 director, 1 division lead. And we have kind of 3 or 4 other positions that we want to add over the course of this year. So we run lean or leaner, I think, than most companies our size. We're run rating to about 15 million of revenue for this upcoming year, and our goal is to hit a little bit closer to 18. We run lean in the places that don't drive growth. Or we outsource the support that isn't inherent to what is a differentiator to our customers. So for us, partnering with an Insperity and a PEO may not seem like what you're trying to do to scale a business. But for me, I see that as that is not necessarily a differentiator for us. The compliance side of HR, necessarily having benefits that scale a little bit and give us economies of purchase power, I guess, as a part of a larger PEO, and provide additional benefits to our employees. We can redeploy that capital back into things that actually salaries for our employees and better comp, and making sure that our benefits are comparative to everybody else. Similarly, on the finance and accounting side, I love finance and accounting, so I'm our acting CFO, and then we outsource the transactional accounting and finance to another entity. That is not a differentiator of our business to our customers or to our employees. So why am I going to have that internal to my organization? Now, eventually, you become $100 million revenue business, you have to bring those things internally. But I'm going to stave that off as long as possible, because that is not a differentiator for us to either our customers or our employees. So why would I have that inherently taking up resources and bandwidth for my core base of employees internally on the indirect side? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, at least at this stage of our growth. We'll see what it looks like down the road. But it's been a lot of growth very quickly. We've managed not to grow and break things, but we'll see. It's a daily task to make sure that we're keeping the culture the same as it was, and that we're as focused on the employees and the customers as we always have been.
Robert, having such a rich personal career history, and I feel like you're just getting started with this part of your career, what would you say you're most proud of thus far in your business career?
Um, Most proud of, I don't know. I would say, um, one of the things that I think I've come into Westforth and tried to do when I very early in my career at Kips DeSanto, I found a lot of success in bringing in mentoring and training people, young people coming out of college or maybe inexperienced in an industry, and having good relationships with those individuals, and creating. There was a time frame where in investment banking, the structure was always the same, right? You hire some people maybe directly out of college, and you have them as an analyst in your investment bank, and then they do about 2 years for you, and then you send them off to go get their MBA, and then you hire them back as an associate once they've gotten their MBA, and then they go on. And so I came in and I did 3 years as an analyst and got promoted to an associate. So I had already had my master's in finance, but I didn't have an MBA. And I remember pushing very hard to say, like, this is a stupid model. Why would you take your best talent and send it off to grad school? And then if they go to too good of a grad school, then they're going to go to a better investment bank. They're going to go to a bulge bracket in New York or something like that. Why would you ever release, good talent intentionally back into the wilds, right?
Mhm.
And then hope it comes back. So we started what was like ultimately, and this is not a great word for it, but a farm system, which was trying to bring people up through the ranks and hire them internally. And that led me to spend on a lot of time mentoring and helping build up people in hopes that they would stick and be kind of career-oriented investment bankers in one of the hardest industries to make people career anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that industry is make a lot of money for 5 to 10 years and then get out kind of thing,
Hmm.
right? Yeah, it is. So if I could do that there, then I knew I could kind of do it in government contracting, which is far more conducive to bringing people up through the system and helping them kind of be career X, Y, or Z. And that is what we focus on a lot today. So some of our best talent here has been people coming from outside the industry. We have one of our best employees that was working in a house painting construction industry, managing teams of people doing painting for houses. We had another individual that was a couple of years out of undergrad from JMU. And those are the gems of the future for us as a company. And I feel as though some people, and not everybody, are a little too quick to push the easy button and recruit for the position and go out hire for the position instead of starting very early on and building that farm system from within, because it's a lot easier to go get a headhunter and go hire for that position than it is to set yourself out on an 8-year track to build up the farm system. And interestingly, I think this ties into the M&A market, right? If you are looking to sell and looking to reach an exit, and government contracting has one of the most efficient M&A markets in terms of inception of the business, the advisory support you can get in the market, all the way leading to exit, that I think exists maybe in any industry out there. So the pathway from starting a company to exit can seem like you see all of the steps along the way, but what that also does is it focuses a lot of people on the exit. And at the end of the day, I've said to everybody, I get asked all the time, so what, you're just trying to buy a government contractor, build it and sell it? And I'm like, I'm having an absolute blast. I have never had more fun than I am right now, owning and operating on a day-to-day basis a government contract. Why would I ever want to give that up? All right. So we are focused on building, and that's all we're focused on, and building and supporting customers and that sort of thing. So we can take a longer term view of building so I'm not looking at somebody that's 2 years out of college that needs a lot of, training and mentorship and meetings to get them up to speed. And as something that is an investment that doesn't marry up to our horizon for an exit, I'm looking at it as I don't really have a horizon. I just want to see people kind of grow within the company. So
That's great. There's this term that it's being thrown out there as far as entrepreneurship through acquisition.
yeah.
So what would you say if someone came to you, Robert, and say, hey, you know what? Instead of just starting a new business, just a startup, let me consider this acquisition, maybe entrepreneurship through acquisition. Any pointers or suggestions?
So let me caveat this very strongly with in the government contracting space and probably in the aerospace and defense. So in our regulated industry and that we are in is how I'm going to couch this. I think it is the best way to go. Yes, if you think that if you have the customer relationships, to hang a shingle and to start with one person, then I would be very, very supportive of doing that. However, if you don't, I don't have customer relationships. That's not where my differentiators lie as a person or a professional. I could not suggest it enough. I think the way to do it is the entrepreneurship by acquisition. You can have some inroads, you can have some contracts, you have some revenue coming in the door. You can get on a GSA schedule and be able to bid some work early on. There is a reason that the vast majority of commercial entities all say, hey, we want to get into government and we want to be in government. And the number of failures that have happened of people trying to do that are immense. It is an insular community of people within the government market. Everybody knows everybody. The relationships need to last. When I look at relationships, I don't think in 5-year increments. I'm thinking in 40-year increments. Like, who is somebody that I'm going to be able to call a friend 30 years from now, not just 5 years from now. And what that does, whether it's intentional or not, is irrelevant. It does seem to make it very difficult at the onset for small companies, despite the funding that flows down to small businesses and 8A companies and set-asides. There is a high barrier to entry in the government market. And I think that if you can eliminate some of that barrier to entry by acquiring an established business, albeit small, that has a little bit of the infrastructure in place, having done it now myself, hands-on, and then I am a huge advocate of taking that approach.
I want to be mindful of your time, Robert, but there's so many, now that you mentioned, I can just take it so many ways.
Yeah.
It's interesting because nowadays you don't see many people think about that 30, 40-year relationship. Not everything, but a lot of people are very, very short-sighted, short-term. What can I get out of this in the next couple of months or a year or 3 years? Yeah. Where does that, I guess, perspective come from?
I don't know.
Okay.
I remember being at KIPS, and I just always had this thought process of, if you surround yourself with good people, which is a requirement of mine, that, people that do right by, others and things like that. And I just never, when I was doing something for somebody, I'd get a call and it was like, hey, do you know any good lawyers in the industry that could, that would help me out? Or hey, do you mind, I remember just very early on being never looking at something as a transactional relationship. Oh, I did this for somebody and now they should do something for me. It was just you help out people, and if you help people out, everything will take care of itself in one way, shape, or form. And I don't know why I thought that, and maybe that was the culture that KIPS helped instill in me early on. But so to this day, I say around here, we have weekly meetings. I just always say like, we are just going to do stuff for folks, and that's partners, teaming partners, or people in the industry. And don't worry about what it's going to lead to or what it's not going to lead to. Just don't even think about that part of it. It's just like, let's just try and like be a good partner and be a good employer and be, do the right thing. And ultimately it'll pay dividends eventually. It may not, but until now, like, so now I've been in my career, like my professional career since 2007, right? Or 2006, coming out of grad school at Boston College. And I've already seen like really strange, very positive things happen for me in my professional career and my personal life, that were because of some like ridiculously stupid or simple or like just easy like thing I did for somebody 18 years ago, right? Like, or somebody that's like, it's like, oh, I was talking to Dan at this event, and he was like, he knows you sold his business back in 2008. So my COO, Chris Embert, he was an employee at a company called Perform Tech, that I sold to GP Strategies back in like 2009. The owners, Emma Lopez Sullivan was one of the owners, and like he was an employee at that company. And now you fast forward to 2024. Actually, I hired him last year, 2023, and I'm hiring him in as like my COO. Like it is such a small world, and that's why the people in this industry that do wrong by others, it will carry with you for the rest of your life. It is a scarlet letter in no uncertain terms. And to do just right by people and to just like is not that difficult. And I think people oftentimes make it harder on themselves than they need to. And it doesn't take that much work to just, try and help out others in the industry and just like take care of people and to genuinely do it without any expectation that there's going to be some turnaround and payoff in the future, right? That's not really the intent.
No, I love it. I'm from the same school of thought. It just reminds me, I was yesterday having a conversation with a client. I was with him for maybe 45 minutes reviewing a document, a totally different transaction. I'm not even involved. He just wanted my advice and my input. And at the end, he was like, hey, please send me an invoice and charge me. And I'm like, no, it's fine. That's not what I do. And I just came off the conversation. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to earn anything. Maybe, hopefully it comes around. Like you said, maybe it won't, but he was a referral from another client of mine. And, hopefully it comes around one day. And I agree with you 110%.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
It's a very small world. And you can make it even smaller on yourself in a good way, and you can make it even smaller on yourself in a bad way.
Yeah.
So
Coming to an end here soon, what would
Yeah.
you say is your biggest challenge today with Westport?
So everybody's, I'm not gonna say hiring. Everybody's challenge is always hiring, right? Like all of us. For me, it's being patient. I think the sales cycle in government contracting is very, very long, right? The procurement and evaluation process. If for those familiar with the industry, it's like, we have contract vehicles right now that have been in solicitation for almost 4 years, and they're probably not going to get awarded for like another year due to, delays in awards and protests and things that can happen in the industry. For me, being a kind of go personality, having to, be patient and understand, that things take time to build, and it takes time to go through the entire sales process of the government and the procurement process the government needs to go through. When I'm really kind of a type A, just like driven personality. I got told by a guy, one of my mentors in the space, that was a part of a company that ended up sold twice. He was the COO It got sold to private equity. He stuck around, and then he was part of the sale from private equity into a strategic large business. And so he had made he had made enough that he didn't need to work for a period of time. And I was talking to him about me taking over a government contractor. And I remember him saying, he's like, you just got to remember, man, things move real slow. And he's like, just, learn to be patient and, things will come out. So for me, the hardest part of my day to day is really just being patient, doing the right small things every day, right? Just kind of, taking care, blocking and tackling, do the right things, and ultimately hoping that, it pays off in the long run. And not being able to, not pressing, to use a sports analogy, when you start pressing, that's when you get yourself in trouble. So it's like, be patient, let the reps come as they can, and things will work out.
That's great. I understand right now you're in the process of your first acquisition, but what does the next couple of years look like for you in Westforth?
Hopefully a lot of organic growth. The goal was to get the first acquisition done within like the first year and a half of owning Westforth. We're going to be right on that if this transaction ultimately goes through. We'll spend 6 months integrating. We'll take, another 6 months probably setting out, doing a lot of proposal activity, using the combined capabilities of the business beyond that. And then I'll be back on the acquisition hunt, probably shortly thereafter. So it's just adding to the team, letting that show up in the P&L, taking what we can from the P&L and, piling that back into the business on the growth side, and hopefully just keeping that virtuous cycle, going. So hopefully nothing too different from what we're doing now, assuming things go well. And, if we face some challenges, we can turn the spigot off of the M&A side of things and just focus on the core. I always say to my team, the first priority is the organic business and the way that we are performing. And if we're performing well, we will redeploy the benefits of that back into M&A. So you don't get the shiny objects of doing acquisitions and things like that unless we take care of the core and the day-to-day. But if we take care of the core and the day-to-day and we're growing on that front, then we'll continue doing acquisitions. So, but we're not going to do acquisitions unless the core is taken care of. That's kind of how I think about it.
Sure, it's number one. Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you're not busy running and operating Westforth, what do you like to do for fun in your free time?
I'm on the golf course. That's me. I'm a member at a country club down the street called Westwood. That's not too far from my house. I live in Vienna, Virginia, so right down the street. So golf, and I read a lot, probably too much, but if you can read too much, but I've just become like a voracious reader. So those are the two things, and then I spend time with my wife, and I've got a 6-year-old daughter. So we're starting to get into a lot more sports practices and things like that, but that's what keeps me happy. If I can get out on the golf course to clear my mind, do some reading to make sure I'm thinking the right way, and then enjoy what I'm doing at work, then I'm good. Like, and being with my family, it's just those 4 things are good enough for me.
I know you're busy, especially being a type A person. When do you try to carve out time for the reading part? Do you have a special time during the day you like to do it, or?
So the benefit of investment banking and working those types of hours is you learn, maybe not inherently, but you learn to kind of go without sleep in some respects. So I only need about 5 hours of sleep a night, something like that. And that comes back to, I used to work for the other 20 hours. Now I got to find other stuff to fill in the 20 hours.
Sure.
So, when my wife and daughter will go to bed, 9, 10 o'clock. I used to stay up really late. So I used to be up till like, 2 o'clock in the morning every night and then, sleep into like a normal time, like 8 a.m. Now I've kind of flipped it. So I'm up at about 4:30 or 5 every morning. So I'll go get some Starbucks in the morning and then do a bunch of reading and work in the morning. And then I'll do a little bit at night. So I always carve out a little bit of time to do that stuff.
Great. I know you mentioned your 6-year-old daughter. So is there maybe softball in the near future for her?
No, she is no softball. I've
Okay.
mostly cheerleading, dance, and then a little bit of tennis, a little bit of golf, and then I'm very excited. We've gotten her. She went to a birthday party and got introduced to lacrosse. So we are like way deep into lacrosse right now, and I love it. I didn't
Wow.
play lacrosse, but a lot of my family all being from New England, lacrosse is
Sure.
huge up there. So I'm all about it. So it's a blast so far.
That's great. Robert, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to learn more about you and Westforth, where can they go to, please?
Yeah, so just come to Westforth Strategy. It's Westforth, the number 4th strategy.com. We're also on LinkedIn. Type in Westforth Strategy, it'll pop right up. That would be the best place to come check us out. So I care more about people familiarizing themselves with Westforth than I do about myself. So my career's I'm boring. Westforth is exciting. So, come check us out, and we'd love to partner with people in the GovCon space. And, we're all about building relationships with folks.
I love it. Thank you again. Take care.
All right, take care.